I mean, on that note, what do you, both of you, make of the, I guess, reactionary attempts to obfuscate what's exactly happening? We had a bunch of Southwest Airlines flights canceled over the weekend, and we had like Jack Posobiec and other folks saying that this was part of a strike wave, part of a strike against mask mandates. The unions have said no. Now, I think it's important to note that none of these right-wing figures noted a month or so ago when Southwest Airlines were suing because they were forced into a emergency time off policy by Southwest Airlines. How big of, oh, there we go. That's a big fluffy kitty. What do you make of like these attempts? And we can get the cat's answer.
No, what's up, buddy?
Oh, that's a beautiful mane. What do you make of like the right wing attempts to, I guess, obfuscate what's happening right now, or at least stick their oar in and maybe harvest some of the sentiment?
All right. So, David, I have a whole rant here, but since I just went on one, I'll let you take that one first.
Oh, I mean, I think the easiest thing is that the conservatives, they don't have like a proper, or at least a appealing structural criticism or analysis of society. So they just try to fit things that can seem a little confusing to folks, right? And like, I mean, if you grow up in America, you grow up in a society of abundance that is like, you can see it, you don't always get to experience it. Do you know what I mean? Like you go to the store and the shelves are stocked. You might not be able to afford a lot of it, but for a lot of people, for example, seeing, empty shelves was a very frightening moment for them. And in the same time, when you see any kind of like labor, I don't know, shortage, you know what I'm trying to say? Like whenever you see any kind of like interruption and things that you think, well, if I have the money and I pay for the service, I should just be able to get it. Right. They're just going to come up with these kind of excuses for it. And I think it is worthwhile though, because look, we can sit and be right all we want on the sidelines, like, but don't let them, it is worth confronting it, because this stuff does permeate into like American culture, much more than I think sometimes some of us like are willing to admit. And so it's worthwhile to be there. To try to confront them, because they don't do it just because, they're just throwing darts at a board. They do it because they know that the misinformation is helpful. Yeah.
I mean, I just want to jump in real quick there, like, and say, I think the absolute solidarity point is you have to protect your coworkers from getting a virus and do whatever you can. I want to throw something out. Maybe this is, I guess, a scandalous or something, but like, if you're just generally speaking, if you have to leave your house to go serve a capitalist to live your life, if that all of a sudden requires a new vaccine, I think your boss should make that worth your time and effort to get vaccinated. So I think like that should be the structural approach. And like the reactionaries that say this never go back to the part where you have to leave your house during a pandemic to go serve a capitalist, right? Like they're not going to have that conversation, but so that you focus on like the other thing. But go on, Max.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the points are both very well taken, right? As fucking dumb and bad faith as this kind of talking point is, that doesn't mean that it's not dangerous, right? And it doesn't mean that the kind of amplifying forces that are trying to force it down people's throats cannot do real damage with it, which means we need to be all the more convicted and forceful in pushing against it, right? Because there are a couple things to point out here. Is like, one, this is, the forces that have traditionally aligned themselves with the ruling class doing what they do best, which is trying to sow division amongst the working class. That is exactly what they're fucking doing here. That is the net result of what they are doing here. And we should call that out for what it is. They're not caring about workers. What they are trying to do is pick certain workers out of the group, segment them off, and convince them that they have less in common than they actually do, right? And so that's one kind of fucking point. Second point, kind of, which is maybe 1B of that first point, right, is Strike Wave, great publication. I'm going to give a bunch of shout outs because I have another kind of point to make about the importance of independent media with all of this, right? But Strike Wave does incredibly good work. They had a really good piece about how COVID vaccine mandates are a workplace safety issue, right? We're talking about this as like a question of individual worker choice and the protections thereof, like their right to refuse that vaccine. But as this kind of piece points out, it's like, well, if I'm a worker going into work and I'm surrounded by unvaccinated people, that is a workplace safety issue as well, right? So there's no one or the other here, right? It's like, you know, you have to sort of pick a lane and stay consistent, right? And if we are trying to kind of protect the greatest amount of workers, the bare fact is that vaccine mandates work. And it's also, you know, another thing that really seems to get lost, you know, the forest gets lost from the trees when we're having this conversation, is that the vast majority of workplaces that have mandated vaccines have seen like over 90% compliance. I'm not saying this is a non-issue, because it is an issue, but like, it's also, you know, something that a lot of the corporate media and the pundits therein aren't telling you, which is that a lot of these mandates have been effective. They have reduced kind of rates of people getting COVID. They have increased worker safety. And so like, that's kind of like, you know, the elephant in the room here. The other thing to point out, right, is from, if I hear anyone, I don't care even if they want to call themselves a so-called leftist or whatever, anyone who is kind of driving at this point, you know, like, it's worth asking them, is like, okay, were you this fucking vocal for the past 2 years when workers were being asked to risk their lives for low pay? Were you this vocal when so many employers cut off their quote unquote hero pay like 2 weeks after they offered it, you know, a year and a half ago, right? That was life-saving money for people who were doing life-saving work that all of us were depending on. Were you raising as much of a stink about like their safety, their ability to, you know, their capacity for self-determination in those instances? No, a lot of it is being very selective. A lot of it is people who are trying to make their own point. And as always, they are using workers as pawns to make that point. This is a long running tradition in American politics and American media. We see it every fucking election cycle. Hamilton Nolan, I think, in these times had a great tweet. I don't know if it was about the pilots union, but it was someone who was involved in this who were rejecting the vaccine mandate. And Hamilton like tweeted something to the effect of like, this is a great example of how even people in the labor movement can be dipshits, right? I mean, like, we shouldn't romanticize the working class or anything like that. It's always going to be messy. There's always going to be kind of issues like this to work out, but we should always be incredibly wary of, you know, wolves in sheep's clothing who are kind of using their platforms to sort of inject these kind of pundit talking points that are really serving them and that are serving to divide the working class up.
Yeah, I think that's exactly on point. And I mean, I'd like to get back maybe in the last couple minutes, just because I do think that, like, maybe instead of sitting here and like prematurely declaring, you know, strike wave, or, you know, we're at the barricades or anything like that, is to say that we have seen a couple of major shifts, right? If anything, since the Great Recession, I think there's been a shift in people thinking about income inequality, right? And realizing that there is a rigged game. But while that is good, I think that sometimes it does like come at the expense of people understanding or thinking about labor. And I mean, like, just like the fact that like working people, we keep the lights on, right? And what we've seen from COVID has been, as you're talking about, like hero pay and all these other things, is that so many people have realized that they are quote unquote essential workers, right? That their labor, you know, despite the fact that they're paid low and they deal with all these kind of abuses and they're told by their bosses that they're expendable. I think more and more people are having the realization that like labor is critical, and even people who might not be laborers themselves are seeing this. I think that the kind of to go back to like what Story was saying, and I'm curious, you know, what you think about this, but like I think this is the kind of difficult moment that we're in right now. Is like, I think there's sometimes on the left, especially like the younger socialist left, a kind of mistake of thinking that like everybody just needs to just sort of be like woken up from their slumber, right? And if you shake everybody up, then we're just going to be living in a new world. It's like, no, people have realized for a damn long time that they're being screwed, right? They might not use the same kind of terminology as you, but most people recognize that. And, you know, you see this when some people are calling for things like a general strike, right? Which, again, like I support in like theory, but it's like we're nowhere near close to being able to do that in practice, which is why this is a much more exciting thing to be supporting. I don't know. Like, I think that like starting to move past just like recognition of a rigged game or even our power, and starting to move into like organization and like structural power is the kind of shift that we really need to be seeing, so that we're not sitting here 10 years down the line being like, oh, do you remember like the fall of 2021? It was so beautiful. We were so young and strong, right?
Right. I'm glad that we ended up here, because I think it is very much where we need to end up. Right. Because, yeah, I, too, in theory, I very much support the idea of a general strike. I have, dreams about, like workers kind of just all deciding to, as Big Bill Haywood said, put their hands in their pockets and bring the rest of the capitalist world to a halt. That would be fucking awesome. Right. And like you said, that is maybe point Z, and we are at point B, like between B and C somewhere. Right. There's a lot of work to be done. And if we are actually serious about seeing that result, then we need to dig in and commit ourselves to making those conditions possible for a general strike to happen, for a working class to become more conscious of itself and more organized among itself, so that it can advocate its collective interests as a class, not as kind of a sort of divided up Republican Democrat thing, not as like a state by state thing, or even a divided up by race. I mean, this is stuff that, radicals and organizers have been saying for a long fucking time. So we better clue into that, because they were very much onto something. This is why I preach so often the importance of solidarity and understanding what solidarity means and how fragile it is. Who was it? Sarah Nelson famously said that solidarity is a force that's more powerful than gravity. I think that's very much true. But building it, getting it to have that sort of strength in the first place, that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of commitment. It takes a lot of tireless, unsung work that, frankly, we haven't done. And we have a long way to go to. And I think that this quote unquote strike wave is a perfect testing ground for our capacity to build that solidarity. And I'll explain what I mean. Right. So, I try to always tell people, as highfalutin and philosophical as I can be when I talk about, what I believe the purpose of my show, Working People, is, or what I believe the purpose of the work we do at The Real News is, right? Like lifting up the voices and struggles of working people, of people in prison, of people who are under the boot of the, police, right? There's something really important there, because the more of our common humanity we see in one another, the more that we hear those stories, like my dad hearing those stories in the car when he was driving for Uber, the more that we identify with one another, the more that we feel in community with each other, and that we feel like we're actually more on the same side, and that there is someone above us who is screwing all of us over. That takes a lot of work, right? Any organizer will tell you that most of their job is just talking to people, right? And it's not just talking at people, it's talking with people, and it's follow-up. It's showing people that you are going to be there for them. And that is something that we all really need to work on, right? Because for as excited as we all are about quote unquote Striketober, and there are reasons to be excited, right? I kind of wrote some of these down just so like viewers and listeners could kind of get a handle on this. But like we said earlier, John Deere, a private sector company that has experienced record profits, upwards of 5.7 billion in the past year. Over 10,000 workers may go out on strike at John Deere at midnight tonight. IATSE, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, the people who make Hollywood happen, right? I interviewed some of them for Working People in The Real News. They are possibly going to be going on strike in a couple days, right? I think it was like, 60,000 of them, with like 90% of eligible members casting ballots and overwhelmingly voted to approve the strike. That could be a huge strike as well. But here's the thing: at Kellogg's, the cereal giant, right? We just had a great report at The Real News by Mel Burr, a wonderful journalist over there in Omaha, who went to the picket line in Omaha, wrote a great report for that. 1,400 Kellogg's cereal workers are on strike right now, not just in Omaha, but in Battle Creek, Michigan, Lancaster, PA, and Memphis, Tennessee. Carpenters in Seattle, 10,000 of them just went on strike, right? There's a lot of strike activity. I think nurses, over 20,000 nurses at Kaiser Permanente just voted to authorize a strike. lot happening. But here's the thing. A lot of workers have been on strike and are still on strike. And when I talk about the importance of like building solidarity up to the point that it has that strength that we know it can have, that means committing to the human beings who are involved in that struggle and not forgetting about them, right? Warrior Met coal miners with the United Mine Workers of America have been on strike, I think, for going on 8 months now, 1,100 of them. It was a big, Kim Kelly heroically kind of pushed that story into public consciousness over the summer. She did incredible work, some of which we were honored to publish at The Real News. But now that, the shiny new strikes are coming up, people are kind of forgetting about it. The people, though, who are planning on how they're still going to buy presents for their kids in who work at Warrior Met Coal, who are wondering how they're going to buy presents for Christmas, they have not forgotten about it, right? Nurses at St. Vincent Hospital in Massachusetts have been on strike since March 8th, right? The company is trying to wait them out, and they have heroically held the line for the vast majority of them. Over 400 union distillery workers in Bardstown, Kentucky have been on strike for, I think, 5 weeks now, and they're hurting. They need support from the strike fund because a lot of, the UMWA is able to kind of support those miners, not just because it has a deeper strike fund, but because that local has done really well at building community support. That's not the case for a lot of folks. The Kellogg's workers, they're not getting much with their strike fund. So where I'm getting with all of this, right, is that if you want to talk about a general strike, and if in your mind, you're imagining that these blue collar workers, whether they be miners or John Deere workers or entertainment workers, right, or teachers or hospital workers, if you're imagining this vast, diverse working class as being the engine driving that general strike, how are you going to get working people to go with you on that? How are working people going to trust one another enough if we can't even show the kind of commitment it takes to see through, a strike of 1,100 miners, a strike of 800 nurses, right? That we don't forget about our fellow workers who are putting everything on the line just because a new strike has come up and we want to show everyone that we see it and we're excited about it, right? There is a lot of, I think, deep commitment there that may be unsexy, and that especially when you're in this media environment, it's hard. It's hard to get people to care, right? I mean, I normally don't talk about this all that much because it makes me sound whiny, but I've been doing working people for years. It's nowhere near as long as people like Michelle Chen and Sarah Jaffe and others have been on the labor beat. And yet, it is damn near impossible to get people to care about workers in general, let alone to care about them for more than a couple days, right? So we have a long way to go. And again, we need to there is work that all of us can do to train ourselves to care more, to be more committed, to follow up on these struggles, to keep them in public consciousness, and to not have the attention span of goldfish, right? To actually, because that's what the ruling class is ultimately most afraid of. This has become a political paradigm across the board, whether it's Mitch fucking McConnell or the bosses at St. Vincent Hospital. One of the most crucial kind of tactics that the ruling class and the interests that serve them have developed in the 21st century, new media world is time, is weaponizing time. They know how short our attention spans are. And so their main weapon is to wait it out until people eventually stop caring. And then it becomes a lot easier to get what you want. This is happening in politics. It's happening in the workplace, right? And so we need to actively fight against that. And again, those of us in media, those of us with platforms have a real responsibility there to lift up other people's struggles, to be like transistors in this larger circuit, right? Where we can, no one has to do everything, but everyone can do something. And together we can become this sort of amplifying force that puts people who may have felt isolated at their workplace, who may have felt like their only option was to leave. Suddenly they're seeing someone on Left Reckoning or hearing someone on Working People say, oh man, this guy was in a very similar position. He found a union, he got help, or he talked to his coworkers about how much they were getting paid and they did something about it. again, we've lived in a ruling class dominated culture that has extinguished a lot of that. Now we are in a moment where we actually have more of the tools and more of the kind of means to amplify those messages, to put people in conversation with one another, to put these struggles in conversation with one another, so that it can become the sort of wave that we hope it is, the class conscious wave that it needs to be, and that collectively we can do that sort of work so that the working class can be bound by the kind of solidarity it's going to need to tackle the forces that it is up against.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it perfectly. And like the point of this is not to like come at anybody who has big aspirations, but it's actually to start the actual work of understanding what it would take to like meet those aspirations. And your work both at Working People's Pond and at the Real News Network is really critical to all that. I can't thank you enough for joining us this evening, and I'd love to be able to do it again soon sometime.
Anytime, guys. Yeah, next time let's meet at the Working People feed, and we can do a crossover there, and then I'll see Grizcomb's ass on the gridiron.
Yeah, good luck this weekend, man. I'm coming. My boy Derrick Henry is hungry. Let's go.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, that's it. I got on David's ass because he vultured like 3 of my draft picks, but really, I mean, this guy is just riding the Yeti Derrick Henry like straight to a championship.
We'll see. I think you might have me this weekend, but we'll see, man. I appreciate it, brother.
Thanks, Maximillian.
Thanks, guys. It was great being here.
Yeah, talk to you soon.